I'm Emily Young, Executive Director of the Nonprofit Institute at the University of San Diego. I'm excited to introduce you to Dr. Tessa Tinkler, who is a Senior Research Associate with the Castor Center at the Nonprofit Institute. Tessa is going to share with you today some highlights from our latest research on the state of nonprofits and philanthropy in the San Diego region. Tessa, take it away.
So thank you for having me today. I quickly want to give credit to our whole team. We have such an amazing group of doctoral research assistants that support us in all our work. So while Dr. Dietrich and I kind of took the lead, so much of the work happens with our doc students. I'm also not going to go into detail about our methodology, but just to let you know that we draw from multiple data sources, some of them secondary data, and then we also have a nonprofit leader survey that we administer annually. And so a lot of our results are from that leader survey today. And I'm happy to answer any questions about methodology after. So here's a snapshot of the entire local nonprofit sector. And these are IRS data from the most recent year available. As you can see here, there are 11,910 nonprofits in San Diego County, and there are 976 private foundations. And this number continues to grow year to year. You can see here in the chart that the sector also continues to grow in terms of assets, revenue, and expenses. And it's a large economic driver, with the sector having $37.8 billion in assets. So let's talk about nonprofit employment. Nonprofits employ a lot of people in San Diego. 8% of all employees in San Diego work in the nonprofit sector. There are 2,849 staffed nonprofits. And if you recall that number that you just saw, there were 11,910 nonprofits overall. So most nonprofits are actually volunteer run. There's just about 24% of nonprofits that have employees. So for those that do have employees, they're still, most of them are very small. 58% of nonprofits have fewer than 10 employees. And hospitals employ the largest share of the sector, followed by human services. The nonprofit sector also contributes to a lot of wages in the region, $6.63 billion in wages. So now I'm going to move on and tell you more about the results from this year's nonprofit leader survey. So at the time of the survey, which was in August 2021, nearly half reported that they were still operating at a moderately or severely reduced capacity. Yet almost a third were operating at a greater extent than usual. And this pretty much sums up the mixed bag of COVID-19's effects on the sector. There are some organizations that are doing more than ever, and there are other organizations that were still sidelined back in August. This obviously feels a little dated now. We don't know exactly what the picture is now, but we know there was still a lot of organizations back in August that were had reduced capacity. Here on the left, we can see that 61% of leaders reported the demand for services has increased, so a lot higher need. On the right, we see that of those that reported the increased demand, there was just only 12% that said that they've been able to meet all of that increased demand. So this just indicates some level of unmet need in the community. In order to meet these changes in demand, nonprofits stepped up and adapted in a lot of ways. And we asked nonprofit leaders what changes they intend to make permanent beyond the pandemic, or what, if that ever exists, I'm not sure, but they could, what they really want to continue to do. And what we found was we had three primary themes that emerged. Continuing remote hybrid work models was something that they definitely want to do. In fact, 74% plan to do this. Second was utilizing technology to maintain quality services and to continue to deliver some programs virtually, even once it's possible to be completely in person. And then thirdly, leaders said they were prioritizing diversity, equity, and inclusion, both within their organization and attempting to better address inequities in the community. So in transitioning, we also collected a lot of data about the diversity, the demographics of leadership teams in nonprofits, and we've been doing that the last few years. And you can see in this chart that the ethnic diversity of the leadership teams and the boards are not representative of San Diego's ethnic diversity. So while 55% of San Diego's population identify as Black, Indigenous, people of color, or BIPOC, Leadership teams, CEOs, boards, and board chairs have far lower representation. An interesting finding that came out of this data is like I said, we asked a lot about the demographics of the leadership team. And what we found is that when the CEO and the board chair identified as BIPOC, the whole leadership team and board were more diverse. And so that's, just one strategy that we can point to, that having leaders at the top that identify as BIPOC affects the whole diversity of the organization. Now I'm going to move on to nonprofit financials and how nonprofits told us they fared financially. And we asked nonprofit leaders how their organizations fared financially compared to what they thought would happen at the onset of the pandemic. And as you can see, a substantial amount of folks fared better or about the same as they thought they would, which is generally good news. In those instances where they did say that they fared better, there was some commonalities among those organizations. One was that they had access to PPP money and they used it. They also had additional support from foundations. And some of them noted that they just had loyal individual donors that really stepped up. Nonprofit leaders also pointed out the work that they did to innovate and move quickly in the face of changing conditions as one of the reasons they fared better than expected. And to back up this, we also asked nonprofit leaders about their financial health, how they rated their financial health. And nonprofits, they did tell us that there were losses in individual donations. There were definite losses in revenue, in program service revenue, fee-for-service revenue. But despite all those losses, most nonprofits reported to be financially healthy. 58% rated their health as somewhat or very strong. And in a sign of stability, 91% predicted their financial health would be better or the same in the next 12 months. So overall, nonprofits were feeling, somewhat confident in their finances for the next year or two. However, a deeper look at subsectors and organization size does show a different picture for some nonprofits. So on the left here, you can see that financial health declines as the size of the organizational budget decreases. So here, the smallest organizations were much less likely to report financial health than the largest organizations. And similarly, on the right, you can see that environment and arts lag behind other subsectors in reporting strong financial health. Another indicator of financial health is how many months of cash on hand an organization has to pay monthly expenses. And San Diego County nonprofits reported having very healthy cash reserves. You can see here, 85% reported 3 or more months of cash reserves, and 63% reported 6 or more months of cash reserves. This is, much higher than we have seen in the past. In the past, it was very typical for nonprofits to have 1 to 3 months of cash on hand. So, there are a lot of nonprofits that have additional cash. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the nonprofit workforce. This is one of the challenges that, nonprofits are struggling with as much as every other sector right now in the United States. In light of this great resignation and hiring difficulties across all sectors, we asked leaders to predict the size of their workforce in the coming year. And you can see that 2/3 of leaders said they plan to increase their staff size. This is not surprising given that so many of them also reported increased in demand for services. And this is just some additional data that points to this real increase in nonprofit jobs. We also track data from Nonprofit Works, their job postings, and there's just a very large increase in job postings at the end of 2021. So, despite the intent to hire, like other sectors of employment, nonprofits face some difficulty. While 80% of leaders surveyed said they were hiring right now, 87% indicated they were having some trouble hiring. This was particularly true in health, human services, and education. And they cited cost of living, childcare, and burnout as some of the barriers that they're facing in recruiting and retention right now. Nonprofits were not the only to adapt. Many funders adapted their grant making to respond more quickly and efficiently to meet emergent needs. And so we asked respondents, which practices they hoped funders would continue in the future. And as you can see here, the increased flexibility and long-term funding was the most popular. This is what nonprofits really want to see. And it was followed by capacity building for nonprofits. Then, also important, but maybe not quite as important, was minimizing application and reporting requirements. Although some nonprofits want to see funders listen and communicate more transparently, this was not as much of a priority as the desire for flexible funding and multi-year funding. So many times we do these surveys and we find the same thing over, each year, year after year, but this is a little different.
Yeah.
We're in a different time period right now. So I really appreciate you all listening.